Hi everyone, good to see you on my channel today. Today I will tell you a wonderful story. It is full of love and kindness. I hope you enjoy it and I wish you an enjoyable viewing experience. Thank you. So Terry, are you and your girlfriends going dress shopping today? If anything, write to me right away. I'll wire you more money on the card in case you don't have enough. It's not like I'm going to order a dress from Dior, Dad, Terry said, laughing. Well, yes, we'll see something interesting and designer. But don't worry, I don't plan to spend an astronomical amount of money on it. Leonardo Patrick looked lovingly at his only daughter. The businessman was proud that he was able to bring up in her modesty and the ability to properly manage money. But still, sometimes there were cases when Terry too literally understood the meaning of the word economy. Honey, you know I'd do anything for your happiness, right? Her father asked, grinning slightly, even accepting your Joe. Though I still think you were a little hasty in getting married. I've told you 1,000 times, Joe is my one and only, my soulmate. I remember. Patrick raised his hands conciliatorily to Leonardo. It's not even about that now. It's about you not being shy about asking me for anything you think you need to see at your wedding. After all, what did I make all those millions for? There was such tenderness and warmth in the eyes of the girl sitting across from him at the dinner table that the rich man's heart ached. In those moments, Tara was unbelievably like her mother. Thank you, Daddy, you're the best, she said. And as she stood up, she leaned across the table to hug Leonardo Patrick. Terry kissed her father on the cheek and rushed off to her room to get ready for the pre-wedding shopping. Oh, my darling, you should know how sorry I am that our mother won't be here with you. I'm sure she would have been happy to see what a smart and beautiful girl her daughter has grown up to be. The businessman thought to himself with a slight sadness. Vanessa, the wife of a millionaire, died when the girl was barely 4 years old. A woman, alas, could not cope with the consequences of a severe hereditary disease. Blood disease, dormant in the body of the wife of a businessman all these years, suddenly began to progress with tremendous speed, so that doctors simply did not have time to do anything. She burned out in just a few months, and the day of her death became one of the most black in Leonardo Patrick's life. From then on, he raised Terry practically alone, occasionally employing babysitters. Of course, later, when the girl was old enough to go to school, he hired a wonderful governess to look after her and help her with her studies and lessons. Fortunately, Terry understood from an early age what a responsible job her father was doing and, therefore, gave him little trouble in raising her. Terry grew up to be a very bright, serious, and advanced girl. After school, which, by the way, she graduated with a gold medal, she easily entered one of the most prestigious universities in the capital. Leonardo Patrick made his fortune through honest and hard work. He once started from the very bottom, working as a part-time clerk in a bank. Gradually, thanks to persistence and responsibility, the man was able to build his career and became a successful manager of the network of regional branches of a large bank holding company. Except that his health, over the years, has been severely compromised. Of course, managing such a huge financial giant has always been troublesome, and in some cases, even dangerous. The businessman's competitors were constantly on the alert, waiting for the moment when Leonardo Patrick would make some grave mistake that would open a loophole for them to gain power over his entire business and capitals. Not surprisingly, by his respectable years, the man began to complain more often about his poor health. His heart would seize up, his blood pressure would skyrocket so high that it was time to call the rescue service. And then, in his last year of university, his Terry met Joe, her future fiancé. For Leonardo Patrick, it was a complete surprise, because until recently his beloved daughter had been focused exclusively on her studies and had never thought about boyfriends. And suddenly, as she told him later, at one of the student parties, where she initially did not want to go, Terry met this strange, lanky guy whose dark blue eyes completely captivated the young student. "Dad, can you believe it?" Joe came up to me and asked me if I loved Hemingway. Hurriedly gasping with delight, I told Father Terry. I asked him why you were interested, and he said, "I saw a scrapbook of his poems in your bag. Hemingway is my favorite writer, too. God, you can't imagine how nervous I was at the time. Almost no one reads classic poetry these days, and Joe and his daughter began to fill him with all kinds of facts about the guy. They listened to the same music, and their taste in literature and movies is the same, and he graduated from the same department as Terry, only a year earlier. In short, there was such an idyll between them that Leonardo Patrick just could not bring himself to say a single word against it. When Joe came to him to ask for his blessing and the hand of his daughter, at the same time, the businessman himself didn't like the groom much. There was something about him that bothered Leonardo Patrick. He could not explain it, but sometimes it seemed to him that the young blue-eyed brunette was only doing something snooping in their house. However, he could not really ruin his daughter's happiness with his own hands, could he? With a heavy heart, the father blessed the young couple and took care of most of the wedding expenses. A pearl-pink limousine drove smoothly down the main street of the city, and in front of it there were 3 other white business-class foreign cars, which, all together, formed an incredibly beautiful wedding motorcade. Terry, dressed in a gorgeous white dress with hand embroidery and lots of sparkling crystals, was holding the traditional bridal bouquet and trembling with anticipation of the main event of her life. In just 1 hour, she and Joe would be in the registry office for a wedding ceremony, after which they would officially become husband and wife. Terry couldn't wait to put the engagement ring on her finger. After that, the couple, along with all the guests, will go to a pre-rented for the day restaurant where, as the father assured them, they are waiting for an unforgettable feast for 120 people and a sea of first-class fun. Terry smiled and put her hand over his. Joe was distracted from his own thoughts and looked anxiously at his beloved. "Is everything okay?" "Yes," the girl said, and then she squeezed his fingers lightly. "You're just so thoughtful." "Is it me, or are you more worried than me?" Terry asked without any ulterior motive, because she herself felt the same way. She was pleased to think that she and her chosen one coincided even in such small things. "Of course, what else could it be?" replied with a smile Joe. "This day just has to be the most perfect day. It's just a pity Leonardo Patrick won't be able to attend." "Yeah, me too," Terry said with a sigh. "But I promised him that you and I would have the most beautiful photo shoot ever. I want my dad to enjoy looking at our pictures later." Terry's father did, to his great regret, have to stay home. The previous morning he had a severe heart condition, and his personal physician had recommended that he avoid serious exertion and alcohol, which at the wedding celebration of his beloved daughter would hardly be possible. "It's okay, Terry, don't worry about it," the businessman said to his daughter, the bride. "I'll just rest a little bit, and then I'll be as good as new." The man smiled weakly. Terry was immensely saddened that her father had become ill and that he would never see his daughter in her wedding dress. But her father's health was more important to her. Suddenly, the newlyweds' limousine stopped. Terry didn't immediately realize what had happened, so she rolled down the window and poked her head outside to watch. The reason for the sudden stop of the motorcade was an elderly homeless man in his 50s, slowly crossing the road on the crosswalk. He was dragging an old baby carriage behind him. At first, Terry thought it was a child. But when the beggar stepped into the middle of the road, she could clearly see empty bottles and a large piece of cardboard sticking out of it. The businessman's daughter had heard that homeless people often use such wheelchairs as an auxiliary device where they could deposit waste paper, glassware, and other materials collected at the dumps, which they could then take to collection points and get money for them. The homeless man did not look like an alcoholic, but he moved very slowly. He seemed to be in a fainting state, and could hardly distinguish what was going on around him. Terry noted to herself that the beggar was dressed, though shabby but clean and tidy. So it was not because he had taken any alcoholic substances. The bride thought that maybe he was sick. That's why he was treading so carefully, so that, God forbid, he would not fall in the middle of the roadway. "Well, what are you poking around in there? Come on, hurry up. Can't you see we have a wedding coming up?" shouted the limo driver, pushing the poor beggar. Joe was visibly nervous, too. He tried to look out the window, then sat back down. The annoying nuisance in the road seemed to annoy him terribly. "What? Is he there soon?" "No," the groom asked unhappily. "How should I know?" Stuck like a sleepy fly, the driver hit the steering wheel in despair. Klaxon made a shrill sound, and at that moment the beggar turned toward the limousine. When he met Terry's gaze, the man froze. For a few seconds he looked at the girl in silence, and then tears glistened in his eyes. "Jane, daughter," he shouted suddenly, and then he waddled briskly toward the bride. Terry was at a loss, not sure how to respond. "Daughter, sweetheart, why didn't you let me know about you before? I almost buried you. Let me at least hug you." The tramp did not stop talking, and at the same time he tried to embrace the dazed Terry. "Wait a minute, man," the bride slipped deftly out of his grasp. "I don't know what happened, but I'm not your daughter. And my name isn't Jane." The beggar stopped, looking at the girl with unspeakable sadness in his eyes. "You don't want to know me anymore, do you? Well, nothing. I understand. Who needs some old bum?" "Joe," Terry frightenedly called to the groom, and the young man jumped out of the limousine. "What are you doing, man?" he asked him rudely. "I told you. You're mistaken. Stop talking nonsense. You scared my fiancée to death. Terry, better get out of here before I slap you around." The elderly hobo looked at him as if he had nothing in front of him. "Don't talk to me like that, young man," he said slowly. "I am, after all, much older than you, and I am entitled to respect." "What?" Joe's tone was high, and he suddenly took a swing at the old man. Terry, running out of the car, could barely stop the groom because she could see that the beggar was suffering from a high fever and cough. The red spots on the man's cheeks and the slight chills that made him unsteady to stand up spoke for themselves. "Joe, why would you do that?" "That's not what I meant." For the first time, Terry looked at the boy reproachfully. "The man needs help. Can't you see he's sick?" Terry felt truly sorry for the homeless man. The girl, though rich, had a good heart, and always had compassion for those who had been in a difficult situation. "We should call the police." Joe shook his head stubbornly and said, "You never know what that old patsy has in mind." "God, what kind of nonsense are you talking?" Terry shook her head. "He just mistook me for his daughter, that's all. Who knows if she's gone missing or worse? No, I can't let her go like this." With these words, the bride approached one of the white cars and, taking a couple of large bills from her purse, handed them to the driver. "Here. Please take the money and take this man to the hospital." Terry nodded toward the beggar, who was still standing there, his head low and staggering with the fever burning him from within. With one hand, the homeless man continued, as was his habit, to hold his stroller, and with the other, he tried to wipe away the tears that kept rolling down his dry, bristly cheeks. "No problem. We'll make it perfect, Terry Patrick," the chauffeur replied, and helped the exhausted homeless man into the car. As they drove away, Terry involuntarily touched her forehead. She, too, had a headache from worry. Taking a few deep breaths and exhalations to calm down, she heard her future husband's disgruntled voice behind her. "Terry, are we going to get married today or not? We're already 20 minutes late with that bum." Terry looked at Joe and, for the first time since they had met, wondered if she knew the man she intended to marry so well. In the end, Terry decided that Joe was acting so aggressively because he was worried about the wedding, and also because he was afraid that the beggar might hurt her in some way. Despite the fact that the wedding cavalcade was running a little late, Joe and Terry's wedding still took place, and up until the last moment, Joe acted as if the girl's remark about the homeless man had offended him to the core. The young man only calmed down when the registrar announced that they were man and wife. When he put the ring on the finger of his now lawfully wedded wife, Joe visibly relaxed and joyfully said to the bride and all the witnesses, "And now, my friends, the restaurant awaits us." The guests hooted in unison, and the entire crowd began to move toward the exit, letting the happy newlyweds through. The rest of the day was spent in the Chick restaurant, enjoying the beautiful live music. Leonardo Patrick ordered the whole orchestra for his daughter, the wonderful food and the funny competitions hosted by the showmen. The only thing that kept the young bride awake was the thought of the poor homeless man she had sent to the hospital. The girl was, to her heart, touched by the sincerity of his words about her missing daughter. She thought of how her own father would have felt if something like that had happened to her. A couple of days later, Terry decided to visit the beggar and see if he needed any more help. After asking the motorcade driver for the address of the hospital where he had taken the man, Terry got ready and drove there without a second thought. When Terry arrived at the hospital, the first thing she did was go to the head physician to find out what had really happened to the homeless man. She explained the situation and asked if she could visit the unfortunate man. "You don't have to worry about his condition." Walker turned out to be a tough nut to crack, even though he came to us in a very serious condition, the doctor told her. "Is it something serious?" Terry got worried. "That's just it," the doctor shrugged. "It's an advanced stage of pneumonia, and if you hadn't sent him to us, it could have ended sadly. We managed to give him all the necessary medications, IVs, and injections, but the risk of further inflammation is still there." The doctor escorted Terry to the beggar's room, and the girl knocked softly before entering. "Harry Walker," cautiously called his name, Terry. "May I come in?" The homeless man's eyes instantly flashed with joy as soon as he saw his visitor. "Jane, my daughter. Well, of course, come in. It's so good to see you, Lord. Have you acknowledged your father?" Terry smiled modestly, and walking into the room, sat down in the chair next to the man's bed. "Harry Walker, I'm not Jane. My name is Terry, and I am the natural daughter of businessman Leonardo Patrick. Will you please tell me why you think I'm related to you?" Walker wanted to smile, but he hesitated as he watched the girl staring at him intently. The joy in his pupils began to fade like the flame of a dying candle. "How is it? I brought you up since you were a baby. You were just a baby. Do you even remember your mother?" Harry Walker looked at the girl hopefully, but she shook her head negatively. "I don't even know what you're talking about right now. My mother died when I was 3 years old. I was raised by my father since I was a little girl. I just can't be your daughter, you know." The man finally seemed to realize that the girl sitting in front of him was not his daughter. Rubbing his face with his hand, he asked Terry tiredly, "Then why did you come here? Don't think I'm grateful to you for taking me to the hospital and paying for my treatment. But if you're not Jane, what do you want from me?" Terry looked at Harry Walker with sincere warmth. "I want to help you, but first I need to know how you ended up on the street. Maybe I can make things easier for you." Walker sighed heavily, and then he held up his hand. "What can you do to help?" "Myself, to a certain extent. I'm to blame for what happened to me." The man wrinkled his hands embarrassedly on the bedspread. He must have been very nervous, and then began his sorrowful story. It all started 3 years ago. Back then, I was still a normal man. I had a good job at the steel mill, a beautiful wife, and my daughter Jane, my greatest joy in life. He looked at Terry again, but this time with regret. When it happened, my wife Valerie and I had no idea what to do. Jane worked as a manager in a travel agency. She sold tours of the protected areas in neighboring cities. She organized various excursions. She liked it all very much, and she loved her job. And then her bosses sent her on a business trip. She had to go by train. It was cheaper that way. My daughter was to take there a large sum of money, and I dissuaded her from the trip as best I could. My heart then was not in place. How can it be? A young girl and all by herself, such a lot of money. Harry Walker wiped away the tears that had come to his eyes at the memory of his daughter with his fist, and then he continued, "So my Jane never made it to the damn town. Valerie and I never found out what happened to her. My wife was black for 6 months because the police couldn't find Jane. But we couldn't bury her either. There was no body." The homeless man clenched his fists angrily and muttered through his tears, "My God, how unfairly everything is arranged in this world." She, a pure soul, did not deceive anyone and never, on the contrary, only tried to do good to everyone. Harry Walker sobbed softly and spoke softly. Valerie died of a heart attack a year later, leaving me all alone. God, I'm so sorry. Terry sympathized with him sincerely. The man nodded and finished his story. She couldn't take it, and I didn't go far either, after she passed away. I was so drunk that I couldn't wake up for days at a time. I hoped that I would die in my sleep and go straight to my girls. And then those black realtors just arrived. They drugged me. I do not even remember how I signed the papers. Only in the end, it turned out that I gave them my apartment voluntarily. They threw me out on the street, and since then I've been drifting around the old derelicts for 2 years. I live, as they say, by what God wills. And you don't want to get out of all this at all? Terry asked him cautiously. What for? Sadly looking at the girl, said the homeless man. What good would it do me to strive for something better when the 2 people I cared about most are dead? I do not even know if Jane is alive. Most likely she is already in the other world, along with Valerie, since all these years have not shown up. Then, as if the man remembered something, he reached into his shirt on the dresser, from the breast pocket of which he pulled out a small photo. Here, look, honey. Walker handed the girl the picture. That's my Jane. I carry her picture with me now by my heart. Terry picked up the picture and looked closely at the young girl in it. A second later, it was as if Terry had been doused in ice water. Her hands and feet trembled, and her heart was beating twice as fast. Even though the picture was badly worn, and in some places the edges had even begun to crumble, the face of the girl, who looked exactly like Terry herself, was very bright and crisp. Of course, the stranger's hair and clothes were very different from those worn by the businessman's daughter. But her features and even the color of her eyes showed that Jane resembled Terry as if she were her twin sister. Oh my God, your daughter and I look alike. The girl gasped. So Harry Walker wasn't lying to her, and he really did mistake Terry for his daughter. The homeless man nodded and smiled weakly. What can I say? Mystery, no less. How then could my daughter have such an exact double? Terry looked at him with all seriousness and said with determination, I don't know. Harry Walker, what about the doppelgangers? But I'll certainly try to find out what happened to your Jane. I promise you. After that, the girl said goodbye to the beggar and went straight to her father. Although Terry's condition was nothing short of shocking, she realized that the only person who could have any answers to her many questions was at home, in his office. When Leonardo Patrick found out about the situation and that his Terry might have a twin sister, he first, to his astonishment, tried to put it down to a joke, and then for a while denied it, saying that he did not understand what his daughter wanted him to say. But when Terry told her father how Harry Walker had suffered from obscurity all these years, and how tragic the loss of his entire family had been for him, Leonardo Patrick's heart softened, and he asked his daughter to sit down before the businessman told her the whole truth about her birth. Terry, daughter, don't take it personally, her father warned her. Whatever you find out now, you should know that your mother and I have always loved you as our own. Nothing else matters. What do you mean, like your own? Terry frowned. You adopted me, didn't you? Not really, the businessman sighed. You see, Vanessa and I have been unable to have children naturally for a long time. We went through every treatment, and alas, infertility turned out to be, for both of us, a merciless verdict. Vanessa was very upset, and I, looking at her suffering, suggested that she try something like surrogacy. What? Terry couldn't believe her ears. Of course, at the time, it wasn't exactly legal, Leonardo continued, looking at his daughter with a confused look. But we found a woman who agreed to give us her child. Her name was Valerie. It seemed to Terry that the floor beneath her slowly began to move away from her. The girl's eyes went black for a moment, but she made a tremendous effort not to faint and to learn the mystery all the way through. Valerie was living at the time with her parents in a dilapidated house, and she really needed the money to move into a new, spacious apartment, Terry's father said. She happened to get pregnant with twins from a bad man. He refused to acknowledge the children, and Valerie didn't know what to do next. At that point, it was too late, and she had no way to terminate the pregnancy. So I'm not even your own daughter. Terry's lips turned pale with excitement. But it doesn't matter. Her father assured her. Yes, back then, we didn't have any documents with the conditions spelled out, as we do now. Just a verbal agreement. But Valerie turned out to be an honest woman, and after giving birth to twins, one of them was given to us, and the other she kept. Don't worry, we didn't cheat her. She got exactly enough money to buy herself a new apartment in a nice house. Terry didn't know what to think. On the one hand, what her own father had told her was a real crime. On the other hand, she and her mother had in fact helped an entire family. What would have happened to Valerie if she had taken two small children into a house that was about to fall apart? And with the elderly parents, surely things were not so easy. Vanessa found out through her friends at the hospital that Valerie got married 6 months later. Leonardo Patrick finished his story. Her husband turned out to be good and immediately adopted a little girl. Apparently, this is the same Walker. I doubt he knew anything about my deal with Valerie. We asked her not to tell anyone about it, and the way he reacted to you, he still didn't know. Terry sat on the chair, gripping tightly to the soft armrests, as if she thought she were going to faint. So I have a twin sister, and this is the Jane that Harry Walker thought I was. She said more to herself than to her father. The businessman looked anxiously at his daughter. He was well aware of the feelings the girl felt at that moment. Darling, Jane is dead. There's nothing you can do, and I don't think there's anything you can do for Harry Walker. I could ask him for a job, of course, but I'm not sure he'd get anything higher than a janitor. Terry suddenly perked up. No, Dad. That's the thing. The police never found her remains. It's possible that Jane is alive, but for some reason she's not answering her phone. I want to try to find her, but I'm gonna need your help to do it. The businessman only shook his hands. If you think it might help your new acquaintance in any way, I'm all for it. Thank you, Daddy, Terry thanked. I really need to find her, and I'll do whatever I have to do it. Joe, unlike his father-in-law, did not appreciate Terry's plans to save his sister. Frankly, he had his own far-reaching plans for his father-in-law's fortune. He had hoped that the businessman would soon go to heaven, and Joe, as the full husband of his daughter, would take all the deceased's fortune in his own hands. Terry, why would you do that? He asked his wife indignantly. What stupid idea have you got in your head? If a man hasn't been found in 3 years, it means he either doesn't want it, or he's long dead. Spare your father's money, please. Terry squinted and quietly asked her husband, why do you suddenly care so much about Daddy's money? Joe, you've been acting so strange lately, I don't recognize you. What's the big deal if I'm just trying to talk sense into my overly romantic wife? Joe asked her in a gentle tone of voice. The young man gently put his arm around his wife's waist and said in a honeyed voice, I don't tell you not to look for anybody, it's just that... Let's take our time. Maybe this Jane of yours will find herself when she decides it's time for her to come back. Terry did not change her husband's mind, but instead hired 3 detectives, each of whom was assigned to search for all possible information about the missing girl. The businessman's daughter reasoned that, one way or another, one of them surely will be able to find the end of the thread, pulling which Terry, finally, can find out the trail of her lost sister. Nearly 2 months had passed since the detectives had been hired, and no movement in the case was in sight. Terry was on the verge of despair when, unexpectedly, she received a call from Brad Monaghan, the oldest and most experienced of the three detectives. Terry Patrick Dance. We seem to have the right track. The woman you were talking about now lives in a remote taiga village. Technically, she's the wife of a local gamekeeper, but she came to the area exactly 3 years ago, and no one had ever seen her before. What's her name? Terry asked with excitement in her voice. The only inconsistency here, said the detective uncertainly. The ranger calls Ashley's wife, but I think he's not telling the truth. What made you think that? I did not understand the young woman. On the contrary, it is likely that we were mistaken. And this girl is not my sister. Well, Brad Monaghan replied cryptically. The thing is, Ashley was the name of the ranger's late wife. She died 5 years ago after a bear attacked their lodge. Is that so? Then it's really worth checking it out. An approving sigh was heard in the receiver. The villagers say that the woodsman's new wife does resemble that first Ashley a lot. But still, they swear, it's a completely different woman. Okay, I'll take the first flight out, Terry assured him. And then she hung up. When the businessman's daughter arrived at the address, accompanied by her father's guards, she was very surprised. She was standing in front of the forester's well-built house, built of strong logs. A few chickens were running in the yard, and a goat was strolling leisurely, chewing on grass. The door was opened by a woman whom Terry thought she was looking in a mirror. She looked so much like her. It was, without a doubt, Jane. In her sister's arms sat a 1-year-old baby boy. He was staring with interest at the guest who had come to their house. "Hello, who do you want?" asked her the forester's wife in a completely calm tone. It was as if she hadn't noticed the striking resemblance between them. "I'm actually here to see you. Your name is Ashley, right?" "Yeah," she said slowly, and then looked more closely at Terry's face. At that moment, she seemed to realize, Mother of God. Ashley groaned and instinctively backed into the house. "What do you want with me and Peter? Why do you look so much like me?" The woman's voice had almost broken into a scream when her husband came to her from the next room. One look at Terry was enough for the huntsman to know what had happened. "Calm down, my love. She's not going to hurt you," he began to reassure his wife. "I think the woman is just here to talk." "That's right. I have something very important to tell you, Ashley." Half an hour later, when everyone had calmed down, the mistress of the house put the kettle on the stove and sat down at the big table. Opposite her sat her husband, John, and a strange stranger from the city who looked just like her. Terry explained to her who she was, and also told the family who Ashley herself really was. When Jane learned her real name, she frowned so hard that a distinctly deep, horizontal wrinkle cut across her forehead. "Harry Walker, Dad." She tried to remember something, but she didn't seem to succeed. "I'm sorry," she finally said, "but I don't remember anything at all. John found me in the woods near the railroad tracks. I don't even remember how I got there. It was only here that I woke up." "It's true," confirmed the huntsman. "I was just making my rounds. I saw something red in the grass. So I went closer to look, and there she was." The man lowered his gaze, unable to cope with the heavy memories. "My wife died like that once," he continued. "Only she was mauled by a bear, and Ashley had her head bashed in. Of course, I couldn't leave her in the middle of the woods. Took her to my place, got her out the best I could. She didn't have any ID on her, so I guess they robbed her and threw her off the train. Her legs were all covered in fuel oil, as if she had crawled along the tracks for a while before she finally lost consciousness. Your dad, Harry Walker, must have thought something like that from the beginning. He said you had a lot of money on you, and you were taking it to another town for work." Jane sat for a long time, immersed in herself, but gradually some glimmers of memory appeared on her face. I think I'm beginning to remember something. It's still very vague, but The woman shifted her gaze to Terry. Wait, but then you and I, we're sisters. It's just that I'm just now beginning to realize all this. I know it was a real shock when I found out. Terry smiled back at her. Little Peter crawled quietly over to the businessman's daughter and gently tugged at her pant leg. Oh, he's so cute. Is that your and John's little boy? Jane blushed, and John proudly explained, when actually, I mean Jane, got better. We realized that we both felt the same way about each other. So we thought, why do we have to figure anything out, go anywhere? We have each other, and that's all that matters. We started living as husband and wife, and then lo and behold, we had Peter. Yeah, but my son has great health problems, Jane added sadly, as she took her son from her husband and placed him in her arms. Peter, my Peter, suffers from a heart defect. What a nightmare. And what do the doctors say? John frowned slightly. They say that we need an operation, and we have to do it now. But it costs so much money that we will never be able to collect it. What? Here we, the Rangers, have a salary. We even went to the local healer and put candles in the church. Ordered prayers. All the same, nothing helps. John quickly brushed away a tear that rolled down his cheek. He was a strong man, but the fate of his son made him weep. The woodsman didn't know what to do in such a situation. But money isn't the problem. Terry looked at the boy fondly. We just need to take the baby to the city and show him to a good specialist. I will pay for the surgery. The main thing is that it will save my nephew's life. Jane kissed her sister on both cheeks, squeezing her in a tight sisterly embrace, then thanked her heartily. You know, the first minute I saw you, I thought you were a witch on our doorstep. You were my double. And now I realize that you are an angel who flew to us to save our son. John, for his part, also warmly thanked the girl, and she drove back home to arrange a temporary move to the town of her newfound relatives. Leonardo Patrick was overjoyed to learn that Terry was able to find her own sister. Terry wasted no time in making arrangements with the leading specialists at a clinic in the capital, and within a month, Peter was successfully operated on. The baby has a long recovery period ahead of him, but he is already on the mend, which means that he has a healthy future ahead of him. Jane, having arrived with her husband in the city, the first thing she did was go to meet Harry Walker. When she saw her father, she remembered everything at once and threw herself into the arms of her closest and dearest man. Daddy! Sweetheart, she cried on his chest. I'm sorry I didn't let you know about me. I couldn't even remember my own name. Poor thing, what about you? You almost died in the street. And Mama? My God, she's dead because of me, isn't she? Don't blame yourself, my daughter. Harry Walker patted Jane on the head, reassuring her. The most important thing is that you are alive and well. Thanks to your John for getting you out of the woods and looking after you the whole time. They made me a grandfather, too. Isn't that lucky? And my mind me a grandfather, too. Isn't that lucky? Old age, I have a daughter again and a grandson. And what a wonderful son-in-law I have. We all have Terry to thank for that, Peter's mother replied, smiling through her tears. If she'd given up hope and stopped looking for me, to think how awful, would never have met. Terry stood next to him, hugging little Peter and crying softly with happiness too. Now she had another family and a sister to share all the important events of her life with. Meanwhile, Leonardo Patrick discovered some very interesting recordings on the house's internal cameras. They showed Joe, in the absence of his wife and father-in-law, searching a safe containing valuables and important business papers. The boss had probably got the code to the safe from one of the servants, with whom he was in cahoots. The businessman did not hesitate to call the police and turn in his unhelpful son-in-law. As it turned out later, Joe worked for Leonardo Patrick's competitors and was supposed to infiltrate their family in order to ruin it as soon as possible. All the company's assets and some of its valuables. Joe would be rewarded after he had completed the task, and at the same time sent his wife's father to his death. Terry, upon learning of all this, promptly severed all ties with her tormented spouse, divorced him, and threw him out of the house. But the rascal would not get away with it anyway. Now he faced prison time for industrial espionage and attempted burglary. However, Terry was not the least bit upset about it. Sometime later, she met a young lawyer named Chris. And after a year and a half of tender and honest relations, she married him. Now the young family is happy, and Terry is expecting the birth of her firstborn son, whom the couple wants to name Thomas. Terry is friends with his twin sister and maintains a good relationship with Harry Walker, who is currently studying to become a warehouse manager will run Leonardo Patrick's own grocery store. The man is unspeakably happy to have the opportunity, albeit in the second half of his life, to start from scratch. The support and love of his family allowed him to rise from the very bottom, and now he proves to everyone in need that even in the worst of life, not everything is lost, and help can unexpectedly come from the side that you usually do not even look. Thank you for watching this video to the end. Subscribe to the channel. Like it, write comments if you like the story, and see you on the channel.